The Cambrian Explosion, a fatal challenge to Darwin's theory. The Cambrian Explosion is one of the most striking episodes in the history of life on Earth. Around 538 million years ago, in a geologically brief window, perhaps 10 to 20 million years, the oceans filled with an astonishing diversity of animal life. Almost all the major animal body plans phyla we see today first appeared in this period. Trilobites with armored skeletons, complex worms, sponges, brachiopods, and creatures with sophisticated sensory organs like compound eyes arose suddenly and fully formed. For Darwin's theory of gradual, step-by-step evolution by natural selection, this event is nothing short of catastrophic. Darwin himself confessed as much in On the Origin of Species. The absence of transitional forms leading into the Cambrian was the most obvious and serious objection to his theory. He predicted that future fossil discoveries would eventually fill in the gaps. Yet more than 150 years of intensive fossil hunting worldwide have only sharpened the problem. Instead of finding transitional ancestors, paleontologists continue to find abrupt appearances. The artifact hypothesis and its collapse. To explain away this troubling absence, Darwin and his followers put forward what became known as the artifact hypothesis. The idea was simple. Perhaps the missing ancestors really did exist, but we haven't found them either because 1. We haven't searched enough, or 2. They were too soft-bodied or too small to fossilize. For Darwin in the 19th century, this was a reasonable guess. Paleontology was still young, and Earth's fossil record seemed like barely explored territory. But that excuse no longer holds. Fossil exploration has been exhaustive. Entire continents have been surveyed. Extraordinary fossil sites like the Burgess Shale in Canada and the Chengjiang deposits in China have been studied for decades. The result? The missing ancestors have not turned up. The argument, "we haven't looked hard enough," is no longer credible. So defenders of Darwinism shifted to the second version. Perhaps these animals were too soft or too small to be preserved. This has been the standard defense in Neo-Darwinian textbooks for decades. But this explanation too has collapsed, undermined by fossil discoveries in China. The Chinese evidence. Embryos that shouldn't exist. Paleobiologists in southern China have unearthed microscopic fossils of sponge embryos and other tiny organisms in rocks that predate the Cambrian explosion by tens of millions of years. These discoveries are remarkable not just for their age, but for their fragility. These embryos are only 500 to 800 micrometers in size, smaller than a grain of sand. They are entirely soft-bodied, yet preserved in exquisite detail, encased in thin crusts of phosphatic minerals on ancient seafloors. Some are dated to 60 million years before the Cambrian explosion. If something as delicate as a microscopic embryo could be preserved, then surely the larger supposed ancestors of trilobites, arthropods, and other Cambrian animals, organisms with tissues, organs, and developing body plans, should also have been preserved. But they are not. This evidence demolishes the artifact hypothesis. The conditions of preservation in Pre-Cambrian rocks were more than adequate to capture soft-bodied organisms. The ancestors are not missing because they couldn't fossilize. They are missing because they never existed. The abruptness of the Cambrian. What we see in the Cambrian is not a slow climb up Darwin's evolutionary tree, but a sudden forest of fully grown branches. Major body plans appear abruptly, not through gradual transformation of earlier forms, but as if injected into the record in a geological instant. Neo-Darwinism depends on slow accumulation of small mutations filtered by natural selection, but such a process should leave behind countless failed experiments. Partial eyes, half-developed limbs, incomplete nervous systems, dead-end lineages. Instead, the fossil record shows sudden complexity with no trail of evolutionary scaffolding beneath it. This is not just inconvenient for Darwin's theory, it directly contradicts it. The engineering problem of building animals. The fossil problem is compounded by discoveries in molecular biology. Since Darwin's time, we have learned that building an animal is not simply a matter of adding new bones or tissues. It requires vast amounts of genetic and epigenetic information, instructions encoded in DNA, regulatory networks, and developmental toolkits like Hox genes. The Cambrian explosion, then, represents not just new animal forms, but a sudden surge of biological information. New genes coding for structural proteins, new regulatory sequences controlling body plans, complex developmental processes orchestrating organs, nervous systems, and sensory structures. Random mutations are incapable of generating such integrated systems in such a compressed window of time. Information-rich systems require foresight, coordination, and an architecture far beyond what blind chance can provide. Thus, the Cambrian explosion is not merely a fossil mystery. It is an information problem, an engineering puzzle that Darwin's mechanism cannot solve. Darwin's defenders versus critics, two sides of the same evidence. The Cambrian explosion does not just present a puzzle for evolutionary theory, it exposes a profound divide in interpretation between Darwin's defenders and his critics. Both camps confront the same fossil record, the same Chinese embryonic discoveries, and the same molecular insights, yet their conclusions could not be more different. Defenders of Darwinism strive to preserve the core of Neo-Darwinian gradualism. They acknowledge the abruptness of the Cambrian, but insist that hidden mechanisms can still reconcile it with evolution. Some invoke evolutionary developmental biology, Evo-Devo, suggesting that changes in gene regulation could produce rapid morphological leaps without violating Darwinian principles. Others appeal to statistical improbabilities, arguing that the lack of transitional fossils is a fluke of preservation or sampling bias. Still others propose soft-bodied ancestors, asserting that the record is incomplete even in light of Chinese embryos. In contrast, critics of Darwinism read the same evidence as a clear rejection of gradualist theory. They emphasize the sudden appearance of fully formed body plans, seeing it as a direct contradiction to slow, incremental evolution. They highlight the engineering challenge of generating integrated genetic and regulatory networks in a mere 10 to 20 million years, an implausible feat for random mutation and natural selection. They stress the completeness of the fossil record, noting that fragile, microscopic embryos and other delicate organisms survived in Pre-Cambrian sediments, undermining the soft-bodied ancestor argument. The contrast is striking. Defenders cling to creative reinterpretations and speculative mechanisms to protect Darwinian theory, while critics argue the evidence is unambiguous. The Cambrian explosion is a sudden surge of biological innovation that defies gradualism. Both sides study the same rocks, the same fossils, and the same genes. Yet where one sees a problem to finesse, the other sees a contradiction that cannot be reconciled. This juxtaposition makes the Cambrian not just a scientific curiosity, but a litmus test for the explanatory power of Darwin's theory. It is here, at life's explosive origin of complexity, that the debate turns from academic nuance to a clash of interpretations with profound implications for how we understand the history of life. Shifting scientific consensus. In light of the Chinese fossil discoveries and the molecular challenges, many leading paleontologists now admit the Cambrian explosion is a real and dramatic event, not an illusion caused by missing fossils. Scholars such as J.Y. Chen, Douglas Irwin, Smithsonian, and James Valentine, UC Berkeley, acknowledge that we must grapple with the Cambrian as a genuine burst of innovation in life's history. They may not all abandon evolution as a concept, but they do concede that the standard Darwinian model cannot fully explain it. Some turn to alternative theories. Evo-Devo, evolutionary developmental biology, explores how changes in regulatory genes could trigger sudden leaps. Self-organization theories suggest physical and chemical laws may produce new biological patterns. Others explore information-based perspectives, recognizing that new coding and regulatory systems had to arise. But what is clear is this: the old Neo-Darwinian picture of slow, blind trial and error cannot account for the Cambrian reality. The verdict: Darwin's theory overturned. The Cambrian explosion is not just a challenge to Darwin, it is a direct contradiction. Darwin predicted gradualism. The Cambrian shows abrupt leaps. Darwin expected a multitude of transitional fossils. The record shows sudden body plans with no precursors. Darwin's mechanism requires immense time. The Cambrian innovations occur in a geological blink. Darwin's theory cannot explain the origin of the vast genetic information required. The Cambrian shows it appearing suddenly. The evidence does not support Darwin's 19th century model. It undermines it. The Cambrian explosion stands as a monumental refutation of the idea that life's complexity can be explained solely through blind, stepwise trial and error. In sum, the Cambrian explosion is the graveyard of Darwin's gradualism. It forces us to abandon the comforting myth that his mechanism explains life's history. Far from confirming Darwin, the evidence shows his theory collapses at the very point where life's complexity truly begins.
Darwin, a prophet? Nope. Not divine. Not in a cave. Just a 19th century naturalist trying to explain life. But here's the kicker. The fossil record contradicts his slow, step-by-step evolution. The Cambrian explosion blows gradualism apart. Sound familiar? Some scientists defend Darwin like religion, faith over evidence, DNA and fossils. Ignore Darwin's gradualism is like Newton's absolute time, a model, not reality. Clocks measure change. They don't create it. Evolution doesn't tick. It happens. Darwin wasn't infallible. Science's strength? Nothing is above challenge. Treating him as untouchable? That's dogma, not science.